She had always been proud. Miss Eleanor Hayes, a dedicated schoolteacher, carried herself with dignity and strength, never asking for help, never showing weakness. But when a tragic mistake left her heart exposed, and the man she admired, Caleb, the quiet carpenter who had always cared for her, approached, she found herself at a crossroads. Pride told her to turn away. Fear whispered she wasn't enough. And yet, in a moment of raw vulnerability, she let down the walls she had built for years, quietly whispering, "Make me feel worthy." It was a simple plea, but it carried the weight of every lonely night, every doubt, and every unspoken desire. What happened next would change both of their lives forever. The morning sun spilled across the quiet town of Willow Creek, casting long, golden beams through the classroom windows. Dust motes danced lazily in the warm light, settling on rows of polished desks and the neatly organized books that Eleanor Hayes had meticulously arranged. She stood at the front of the room, chalk in hand, her posture perfect, her expression composed. To anyone watching, she was the very picture of grace and competence, the devoted schoolteacher who seemed to have everything under control. But behind her serene exterior, Eleanor carried a quiet weight. Years of independence, pride, and unyielding self-reliance had shaped her. She had faced life's challenges alone, believing that asking for help was a sign of weakness. She had buried her loneliness under a layer of dignity, convincing herself that her value came from her ability to manage everything, to remain steadfast when others faltered. Her students admired her for her knowledge, her patience, and her calm authority. Yet Eleanor often felt invisible outside these walls, unseen for the person she truly was. Her heart, guarded and careful, longed for someone to notice her vulnerabilities without her needing to beg for attention or affection. Caleb, the quiet carpenter who had been a part of her life in subtle ways for years, moved through the small town with steady, unassuming presence. He repaired fences, fixed doors, and always seemed to know when Eleanor needed a kind word or a gentle gesture. Yet, Eleanor had never allowed herself to lean on him, always resisting the pull of connection, letting pride and self-respect dictate her boundaries. That morning, as she arranged the day's lesson plans and greeted her students with her usual warmth, Eleanor felt a restlessness she could not ignore. A storm had been brewing quietly inside her, a mix of longing and fear, pride and vulnerability. Something had shifted. Perhaps it was the subtle sadness in her reflection, the quiet ache in her chest, or the way she had watched Caleb from across the town square the day before, offering her a hand and a smile without expectation. Her heart whispered truths she had ignored for too long, that she deserved connection, tenderness, and to be seen, not for what she could do, but simply for who she was. And for the first time in years, Eleanor considered the impossible, allowing herself to be vulnerable even with the one man who had always respected her independence. As the bell rang and students filed in, chattering and laughing, Eleanor's eyes met Caleb's through the window of the classroom door. He nodded, a quiet acknowledgement, a reminder of the safe harbor he had always been. She returned his glance with a fleeting smile, one that hinted at the walls beginning to crack. That day, Eleanor would face a test far different from any classroom challenge, the challenge of surrendering her pride, of trusting that her worth was not defined solely by her independence, and though she could not know it yet, the choice to be vulnerable would set in motion a chain of events that would touch both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The late afternoon sun filtered through the classroom windows, casting long shadows across the empty desks. Eleanor Hayes sat alone at her desk, her hands clasped tightly around a stack of ungraded papers. The classroom, usually a sanctuary of order and purpose, felt unusually heavy, a quiet echo of the storm brewing in her chest. For years, Eleanor had prided herself on her independence. She had faced every challenge alone, late nights preparing lessons, community disputes, and personal heartbreaks she never allowed anyone to see. Her pride had been her armor, protecting her from disappointment and rejection. But today that armor felt brittle, as if the weight of unspoken loneliness had finally begun to crack it. Caleb had stopped by earlier, bringing a small repair for a broken shelf in the library. His movements were quiet, deliberate, filled with a patience Eleanor had always admired. He never lingered unnecessarily, never demanded attention, never forced words. She wasn't ready to speak. Yet his presence lingered long after he left, a gentle reminder that not all support had to be earned or bargained for. Now, sitting in the quiet room, Eleanor felt the walls she had built around her heart beginning to falter. She wanted to reach out, to let Caleb see the fear, the uncertainty, the longing she had buried beneath her pride, but words caught in her throat. Begging felt impossible, beneath the dignity she had clung to for years. Instead, she chose another path. Slowly, deliberately, Eleanor allowed herself a small gesture of trust. She took a deep breath, letting the tension in her shoulders ease, and whispered into the still air, as if speaking to Caleb across the room, "Make me feel worthy." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of years of self-reliance, of nights spent questioning her value, and of a heart quietly craving connection. It was not a plea for pity, nor an act of desperation. It was a declaration of vulnerability. A daring act of courage Eleanor had never permitted herself before. In that moment, the world seemed to pause. The sunlight caught the edges of her hair, highlighting the determination in her eyes. She wasn't asking for love. She wasn't asking to be saved. She was asking only to be seen, to be understood, to be met with honesty and respect. Caleb, arriving quietly in the doorway, paused. He had always sensed Eleanor's strength, her pride, and her reluctance to lean on anyone. But in that brief, fragile moment, he saw something new. The raw, unguarded core of the woman he had quietly admired for years. Her trust, given willingly, without words of command, without demands, spoke louder than any confession could. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, closing the distance without haste. In his eyes was understanding, in his presence was reassurance. He didn't rush her. He didn't fill the silence with empty words. Instead, he simply stood there, offering his calm, steady presence, a living testament to the respect and validation she had asked for. That afternoon, Eleanor discovered a truth she had long avoided, that vulnerability could be a source of strength, that pride and trust could coexist, and that asking to be seen did not diminish her. It elevated her. And as the shadows lengthened across the classroom, two hearts began a delicate dance of understanding and respect, each learning from the other that real connection required not surrender but courage. Caleb remained at the doorway for a long moment, letting Eleanor's words sink in. "Make me feel worthy." The simplicity of the request belied its depth. In those 4 words, he heard the echo of years of unspoken longing, the weight of her pride, and the silent ache of a heart that had always carried itself alone. He stepped closer, his footsteps soft against the worn wooden floor. He didn't rush to fill the silence with hollow reassurances, nor did he offer grand gestures. He simply knelt beside her desk, his presence steady, grounding, and unwavering. His gaze met hers, calm and unwavering, conveying something words never could. "I see you. I understand you. You are enough." Eleanor's chest tightened. She had always measured herself by what she could accomplish alone, by the way she could maintain composure and never falter. She had believed that asking for acknowledgement would make her weak. Yet here was Caleb offering the validation she had secretly craved, without judgment, without pity. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice low and sincere, "you've carried so much on your own. You don't need to prove your worth to me or to anyone. You are already worthy, just as you are." Her breath caught. The honesty in his tone, the steadiness of his presence unraveled the tight threads of self-reliance she had clung to for so long. She had expected grand speeches, perhaps even indulgence in flattery, but instead he offered something far rarer: truth, respect, and unwavering support. For the first time in years, Eleanor allowed herself to lean, not physically but emotionally. She felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly, her chest rising with the knowledge that her pride could coexist with trust, that vulnerability did not mean weakness. Caleb reached out, placing a gentle hand over hers on the desk, an anchor and a promise. I don't need you to ask me to make you feel worthy, he continued. I've always seen it. I've always known. You don't have to carry the world alone. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. This was not a moment of shame or defeat. It was a revelation. She realized that her pride had never been a barrier to love or connection, only to letting the right person in. And now, in Caleb's quiet, unwavering presence, she could finally allow herself to be seen. A soft smile curved her lips, tentative but genuine. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. It wasn't just gratitude, it was relief, acknowledgement, and acceptance all at once. Caleb smiled in return, a subtle, comforting gesture that held years of unspoken understanding. The air between them seemed to shift, lighter now, charged with the promise of something deeper. A bond forged not in need, not in grand gestures, but in mutual respect, honesty, and vulnerability. And in that small classroom, bathed in the warm glow of late afternoon sunlight, Eleanor Hayes discovered a truth she had long feared: that letting someone in, asking to be seen, and embracing vulnerability could be the bravest act of all, and that true worth was not measured by pride, but by the courage to trust and connect. The days that followed marked a quiet transformation in Eleanor Hayes's life. The pride she had once held like armor was no longer a barrier but a foundation upon which she could build trust and connection. She found herself smiling more freely, laughing softly at moments she would previously have dismissed, and allowing small gestures of care to touch her heart without fear. Caleb became a constant presence, not overbearing, not intrusive, but steady. He didn't try to fix her, didn't offer empty reassurances. Instead, he walked beside her, sharing in daily routines, subtle acts of kindness, and moments of quiet reflection. He helped repair the old classroom windows, carried stacks of books, and even brewed her morning tea exactly the way she liked it. Each act was small, but in its quiet consistency, Eleanor discovered the power of mutual support. For Eleanor, the greatest change came from realizing that vulnerability could coexist with strength. She no longer had to shoulder every burden alone, and letting Caleb see her doubts or fears didn't diminish her dignity, it reinforced her humanity. She found herself sharing stories she had long kept hidden, her struggles as a teacher, moments of self-doubt, and dreams she had almost abandoned. And each time, Caleb listened, with patient understanding and unwavering respect. Their connection deepened naturally without rush or pretense. Walks along the quiet streets of Willow Creek became opportunities to share laughter and comfort. Quiet evenings in her home, once spent alone grading papers, were now filled with meaningful conversations, shared meals, and a sense of companionship Eleanor had never allowed herself to embrace. Colleagues and students began to notice subtle changes in her demeanor. There was a new lightness in her step, a gentleness in her interactions, and a confidence that no longer relied solely on independence. Her pride had not disappeared. It had evolved into something richer, a self-assurance grounded in trust and authentic connection. Caleb, too, found growth in the relationship. He learned patience, empathy, and the quiet art of supporting someone without overshadowing them. Together, they discovered the beauty of shared strength, how two people could carry life's burdens side by side, each empowering the other without diminishing their individuality. One evening, as the golden sun dipped below the horizon, Eleanor and Caleb sat on the porch swing outside her home. The air was warm, tinged with the scent of blooming jasmine. Eleanor rested her hand lightly over Caleb's, a gesture of trust and intimacy. "You've changed my life," she said softly. "Not because you solved anything, but because you helped me see that I didn't have to carry everything alone." Caleb squeezed her hand gently. "You've always been strong," he replied. "I just helped you remember that strength isn't the same as doing it all alone. Real strength is knowing when to lean, when to trust, and when to let yourself be seen." Eleanor smiled, feeling the weight of years lift from her chest. In that moment, she understood something profound. Pride and vulnerability could coexist, and trust was not weakness. It was the truest form of courage. Their journey had begun with a single whispered plea: "Make me feel worthy." Now, months later, that plea had transformed into a life built on mutual respect, understanding, and emotional intimacy, a bond unbreakable, not because it was perfect but because it was real. Spring had arrived in Willow Creek, painting the town in vibrant greens and soft blossoms. Eleanor Hayes stood by the classroom window, watching her students laugh and chase each other across the playground. The familiar sounds of childhood filled the air, but something had shifted within her. She no longer carried the weight of pride like a shield. Instead, her confidence radiated quietly, grounded in trust, self-acceptance, and the knowledge that she was truly seen. Caleb arrived carrying a small bundle of freshly picked flowers from the edge of town. He paused at the doorway, watching Eleanor for a moment. She turned, caught his gaze, and smiled. A smile full of warmth, gratitude, and unspoken love. There was no need for grand declarations or dramatic gestures. Their connection had grown in quiet, steady moments, each one strengthening the bond that had begun with a single whispered plea. He stepped closer, handing her the flowers. "For you," he said softly, "because you've always deserved to feel worthy. And I hope these remind you every day that you are." Eleanor took them, her fingers brushing his gently. "You've changed my life," she whispered. "Not because you fixed anything, but because you taught me I didn't have to face it all alone." Caleb smiled. "And you've taught me that strength isn't just about doing everything yourself. It's about knowing when to trust, when to share, and when to open your heart." And in that simple exchange, the years of pride, fear, and hesitation melted away. What remained was authenticity, love, and the quiet power of two hearts meeting on equal footing. From that day forward, their lives intertwined naturally. Eleanor continued to inspire her students with knowledge and kindness, but now she did so with a renewed sense of joy, free from the burden of carrying everything alone. Caleb remained by her side, a partner, a confidant, a steady presence who had earned her trust not through grand gestures, but through consistent care and respect. In quiet moments, when the sun cast its golden light across the town, Eleanor reflected on how far she had come. The proud, guarded woman who once refused to ask for help had learned that vulnerability was not weakness. She had discovered that true worth was not measured by independence alone, but by the courage to let someone in and share life's burdens. Their story became a testament to the transformative power of respect, trust, and emotional intimacy. It was a reminder that asking to be seen, simply and sincerely, could change the course of a life. And as Eleanor and Caleb walked hand in hand through the blooming streets of Willow Creek, laughter and love surrounding them, it was clear. Both had found something rare and lasting, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, unwavering courage to trust, to be vulnerable, and to be truly seen.